So I did some contracts for AERO. Then in 1999, I became an ag program manager at AERO. So I started working with the farm clubs. And later, I became the program manager also for the Food Systems Initiative. And so those two things being rather similar in some ways about community development and leadership development and having groups of people in communities all over the state working on some on very, very farm-oriented agronomic things and others on moving this into moving the food from these farms that were doing amazing things into places where they could economically they could use their practices in the marketplace. I will say it that way. We had to have a way to describe what they were doing, and that's what Abundant Montana did, and that's what Buy Fresh, Buy Local did. So we developed those tools and the visual piece, and businesses like Benny's Bistro used that. And the other thing that happened in the Food Systems Initiative is a lot of the barriers were we don't have slaughter plants in our community. We don't have food processing facilities in our community. There is no place in the state to slaughter chickens, for instance. There was no state slaughter plant for chickens, or poultry, I should say, and there was no federal slaughter plant. The last one had been in Laurel, and I think it went out of business maybe in the late 80s, early 90s. So now the only, and the Hutterites were slaughtering chickens, but they had an exemption because they had an on-site where they grew their chickens and slaughtered them and packaged them. And they were all, they had an exemption, if you will, and had a state, the state inspected them and monitored them and helped them get their product into the marketplace. But that was the only place. So we started looking at these barriers and realized some of it was policy. We just didn't have enough resources in the state to help fund entrepreneurs to build facilities to process food in the state. And in fact, part of the Food Systems Initiative was to do a research project and kind of identify when was the last time we had food systems in the place, what percentage of our food was coming from our state in the 50s and the 40s, you know, and today. And it was really a very striking research project because when we looked at the diminishing food that we were growing and eating ourselves, it was exactly the same inverse food insecurity. So if you went from 1950 and the food was dropping like this that we were actually producing, the exact same stair step was happening in for the populations who were food insecure in the inverse. So the less we were producing and consuming locally, the less it was available, and people were, the food banks were a direct, the incline of their need was exactly the decline in our capacity to process and grow our own food in the state. It's a really, really fascinating research project that we worked on with multiple researchers in both universities, at MSU and U of M. And so we were learning a lot about our food system, and and the barriers for a more localized food system became pretty apparent. And it was a little bit different in different parts of the state. But basically, out of this kind of research came, at the national level, what was called food deserts. And what that means is if you're living in a rural area, there's only certain things that you can get. And you certainly, the more perishable things are the last thing you will get. And so those places all over the country got identified. And Montana was one of those places with the worst or the most food desert areas because our people live so rurally in part. and because the services for them, it's just not economical to get them food. So it heightened our interest in providing tools and policies to change that at the legislature. So to do that, we, AERO, started a group of AERO members said, we need to create a collaboration that works explicitly on policy, and it has to be nonpartisan. And we have to be really careful about this, how we develop this policy group. And a group of AERO members got together as one of our outcomes from our food systems initiative and said, these are the 4 things we heard over and over and over. And so we need to start figuring out how to get the legislature conversant about our food systems and the opportunity. So here are issues around why we think our state could be better. First bubble. Second bubble, here's what the economic capacity could be, and here's what this would do to our food security. So we had endless meetings, of course, trying to figure out how we would, as an entity, as a group, I should say. It wasn't a single entity, it was a collaboration of farm groups, nonprofits, and food bank representatives, people that were actually processing foods who had that technical capacity. And we did a study on food availability in Montana and the opportunity for creating more jobs, more economic stability, more food available all through the food chain, basically. And so that we could re-stair-step that loss of food sovereignty, if you will. It's kind of an interesting word to use there, but it feels like that. And also see if we did that, if we turned that around and we were producing more food in the state for state people, our people, we would have jobs, we would have income that was staying in the state. It wasn't being shipped out just in wheat, even though that's a really critical part of our economy, of course. But how much could we keep in the state if we were actually providing incentives for that? So we formed this coalition called Grow Montana. And the principle of being a partner was you had to be, your entity had to be capable of, when the policies under Grow Montana came up, you had to be a Grow Montana person. You had to be a representative of Grow Montana. And you had to represent your own organization. So we had to have it be both because we wanted Grow Montana to be a thing. We were really, really careful about that. So that, because we were thinking in 10 years from now, and 15 years from now, when Grow Montana presents a bill, we want a certain response from the legislature, and that is, we have done our homework. We have checked with the community. We know the numbers about what this would impact and how it would change things. And here's the fiscal piece of this. We understand how this works. If we could provide these kind of services through the governmental entities that we already have, we would be able to then change communities across the state. So we're really intentional about that. And sort of our slogan was, every policy had to be so sensible. If you told it to someone in the elevator or the elevator speech, they would go, that makes sense. And so the language had to be really short, quick, to the point, so that a legislator could read it in 5 minutes, basically, and say, that makes sense, because we knew we weren't going to get to talk to everybody. And we knew we had to have a coalition walk in there and say, hi, I'm a Grow Montana member. I represent this organization, Montana Farmers Union, for instance, and this is why we are supporting this. We think, and they would encapsulate some piece of the thinking behind the bill. So every partner had a really critical role. Food security people did, farm groups did, local food advocates, farmers market people, whoever it was that we had lined up, everybody had a different piece of this whole pie. So in 20 minutes, we could talk about the whole community using 5, 10 people tops. And farmers would come, of course. We'd have farmers come and talk about, this is what it would mean to my business. This is how it would change my farming operation. This is what I would like to do. And I can't do that right now because. So we were able to pass a bill in every legislature since. It started in, I can't remember the year. I'm going to say 2005. Are they on odd years?
Yes.
They are, right? Or no?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm going to say 2005. So we started in the first legislature. We would always take like 4 bills. We would write them, and then we'd take them to legislative services, and they would comb them, let's say. We had great support there, and they are really good at their job. And we would have fiscal information as much as we could, but of course, that's always not enough, and they're really good at that as well. And we mostly ran these bills through the Department of Ag. They would be our big gun, and they would come in and support it. We would have this all mapped out ahead of time, or the Department of Health and Human Services. So often they were co-supporting entities on these bills. So it wasn't like we were asking for something that they were going to go, don't put that in my department, which sometimes happens up there. And sometimes we were just asking for the legislature to put some money aside to research this idea, to see if it's a good idea, and then it would come back to the legislature the next year. So they can do feasibility studies as part of the legislation that they create during the legislature. And those worked out really well as well. Because if they were positive, they'd come right back through and they'd come from that committee. That committee would be the proponent. And I think we were really, really smart in that we knew we would get farm and again, we sort of used AERO principles. This is nonpartisan, and this is community-based, and this is economic development. We would kind of put all that pie together for the legislature so that there was no, it wasn't divisive about who was the sponsor. It wasn't divisive about which community was going to prosper, because it could be any community. And so the Food and Ag Development Centers are direct outcome of Grow Montana. And there's 5 or 6 of them in the state, and they help people who have an idea for creating a local food product go through that process, develop a recipe, find a processing plant, do a package, the whole shebang.
So are there more processing plants now?
There are, and the most significant one is, so in the Food Systems Initiative, some core AERO members in the Flathead and Sanders County, it was a dual county Food Systems Initiative project, identified food processing as their core thing. We don't have any. And we're in berry country and apple country. I mean, they're in the land of plenty, right? And, all the way from, Kalispell to the Bitterroot, right? All of that beautiful food and no place to process it. And all farmers could do was, try to store it on their farms. But anything that was fresh, when the fresh season was over, it was over. So the Mission Mountain Food Enterprise Development Center was an outcome of that. And it's in Lake County. So they have a whole processing facility. You can do any kind of wheat product, and they have gluten-free rooms. So you can do meat. I'll just tell you what I've seen up there. They can dry stuff. They can, cryovac? They can cryovac stuff. They used to be able to juice stuff. I'm not sure if they still have that processing facility where they can pasteurize. If you have a product, Mission Mountain Market could get it from your farm into the marketplace, and has. It's really, really fascinating, the kind of work that they've done. And they've become sort of a focal point nationally from starting from basically an old cherry plant to this whole facility where, and they do training for entrepreneurs, help them write business plans. It's basically a one-stop shop, and they have staff there. They can take people right from what do you want to do, what kind of resources do you have, and get them into the plant and producing something. It's pretty fascinating. I think there's a couple other things I want to say about what AERO accomplished. We have these other organizations who have these fabulous skills, and we always wanted them to be part of our project. We always wanted some of their staff to be in the project working with our members because they have specialty kinds of backgrounds, like the National Center for Appropriate Technology in Butte. We worked together really closely on a bunch of projects over the years. And in fact, NCAT housed Grow Montana for many years because they had the capacity to do that. And anyway, so when you think about this sphere of members, we also had this other wheel on the same transmission going at the same speed in concert with these other collaborators, so that we would have this sort of other layer of capacity that was also supporting the members. And I don't mean to have it like this, because it was more like this. Here's the AERO members and this whole big collaboration thing going on. And this collaboration included staff members from our state departments, technical staff from county agencies, researchers at both universities. And this was a way for them also to be together in a room and think about, what are we working toward? What are the issues what are the barriers in our everyday work? And they could come to these meetings and just have these great conversations all from across the spectrum. So there could be ag researchers, there could be dietitians, there could be food security people, and they were all learning from each other. So there was this whole other wheel going on. And then those people with these great ideas would also be part of AERO, because we would invite them to our conferences. They would join as members. They would come to our task force meetings. And so we had this whole kind of machine going on. And I say Montana a lot, but Washington State University sent fabulous researchers over here to work with the cherry growers. The first cherry grower in the Northwest was here in Montana, and he worked in a farm club with a researcher from Washington State University to do that. So anyways, what would spin off of this stuff, like big clods of mud is what it feels like, would be like Grow Montana. And so we had this capacity in our membership and in these collaborations to actually say, we need a policy group, and this policy group needs to meet quarterly, and we need to fundraise so that we can get them there and pay for their time, and take something to the legislature and get ourselves a lobbyist who is articulate, respected, and really critical was the lobbyist had to understand they were working for Grow Montana, that it wasn't their thing. And we were really fortunate to have Linda Greisen, who has like impeccable lobbyist skills and integrity. And so when she talked to a legislator, it was straight in the eyes. And she would say, this is what we're thinking, this is what we need. And she was just exceptional as a lobbyist for Grow Montana. And she was, I'm not positive how many years, but I bet at least 3 sessions. And those early sessions, which were really hard because it was all new language, it was all new thinking. And it was like getting the legislators to have a conversation with groups they did not normally work with. That was challenging. She was extremely gifted in this way. It was her integrity. At the deepest core, she totally matched the integrity. And she is a longtime AERO member. She totally got that. She knew what she was doing there. She knew how to do it. She knew when to back off and when to press forward. and really instrumental in getting legislators to take the policies seriously and to really think about them and to really add to them. So we were really fortunate in that. And she was a very good communicator back to the group and say, well, today what I found out was, and so do we have an answer to this? And she really used our group well. And I think that was one of the secrets of having it. The integrity of AERO members is imbued throughout the whole process. And so our collaborators too, we had this expectation. This is how we function with one another.